Hey everyone, welcome to day 3 of Energy Week. We've been having a great time with, or at least I've been having a great time learning about many things going on at UT regarding energy and also in the world. So I'm Brian Korgel. I'm the director of the Energy Institute at University of Texas at Austin, and looking forward to kicking off day 3. So this morning we've got a keynote talk from John Berger, CEO of Sunnova Energy International, as well as a series of panels all the way from hydrogen. We've got a panel on grid resilience that's being moderated by Mose Buchel from KUT. That I'm looking forward to that. A panel on industrial decarbonization, funding for startups in the energy space. So that should be great. I want to give a shout out real quick to a smart energy innovation program that we have going on that kicked off last week in E-Week, so Engineers Week. It's co-sponsored by Affinity Energy, Shell, and Chevron, and an organization on campus called Genesis is helping run that. It's a student competition. There's a $50,000 of funding available for students to pitch their startups and spend several months developing their ideas. It's a really great program, so I encourage students from all different majors to get involved. You can be an engineering major, art major, you can be a communications major, whatever you want. So I'm really looking forward to that happening also this year. Really excited about it. All right, so let's get back to our keynote. So John Berger is CEO of Sunnova Energy International. He founded Sunnova in 2012 and has since then served as Chief Executive Officer, President, and Chairman of the Board. With more than 2 decades of experience in the electric power industry, Mr. Berger is an energy entrepreneur who's always supported free market competition, consumer choice, and the advancement of energy technology to power energy independence. Before Sunnova, Mr. Berger served as founder and chief executive officer at SunCap Financial, a residential solar service provider. He also founded Standard Renewable Energy, a provider and installer of renewable energy and energy efficient products and services. Mr. Berger received his Master of Business Administration from Harvard Business School and graduated cum laude from Texas A&M University with a Bachelor of Science degree in civil engineering. So really looking forward to hearing John's thoughts on the great energy transition, and there'll be plenty of time for questions after his remarks. So please, if you have questions, throw them in the chat and we will ask them to John. I'll turn it over to John. Thanks again, John, for being here.
Thank you, Brian. And it's great to be here with everybody, at least virtually. As Brian said, I'm John Berger, founder and CEO of Sunnova Energy International. We are a residential energy service provider. So we started out doing solar only, then we've added batteries, we've added lately EV charging, load management's coming, and generators, and you get the picture. There's a lot of different pieces of what we do starting to come to the marketplace, and then integrate those together as hardware with some software from us, and then providing service just like a utility. So one way to think about us is a wireless power company. We span from Guam, Saipan, which is near Japan, all the way through Hawaii, California, Texas, Puerto Rico, and as far north as Massachusetts and New Hampshire. We will probably be in all territories, save maybe the Virgin Islands, sometime by next year, and for the large part be there by the end of this year. So we've got a wide geography. We say grace of roughly about 200,000 customers across this geography, primarily in the West, in California, in the Northeast, and in the Caribbean and Puerto Rico. We do have a very large balance sheet in the sense that we have kept a long-term contracted cash flows. So again, one way to look at us is as a utility, if you will, with long-term 25-year recurring cash flows that we have then accumulated and generating recurring operating cash for to the shareholders in the business. We went public in 2019, and it's been quite a ride. It's both ups and downs, but it's been mostly up, so that's great. In terms of our business model, the last aspect that I would really emphasize is that we are a dealer-based business model, which means that we have locally owned and operated contractors that go out and originate and install on our behalf. We do upsell existing customers batteries and so forth from direct sales desk every once in a while. And then the other thing is we provide service, and we talked about it last week in our earnings call, where we talked about moving towards a 24-hour turnaround service. So again, something that you'd be much more used to with your electric utility. And indeed, as we think about each home becoming a nanogrid or a small utility, somebody's got to be there to fix all the problems that do occur and make sure the power flows. And so that is us. We're talking about the energy transition. I do think that given the events last week, the invasion of Ukraine, energy is on the minds where it typically is not for most people. We did see crude, I think this morning, hit $111 a barrel. Natural gas is moving up and has moved up tremendously. In Europe, it's trading as high as $50 an MMBTU, and certainly has been in that 30 to 40 range for the last at least 4 months. To give you some perspective, at the hub here in the United States, roughly about, I think, around $4.70. So that was about $2 to $2.50 for the longest time. So energy is becoming much more expensive, bottom line. And we see that moving forth in much higher utility rates across the country. We expect to see significantly higher utility rates in Texas and beyond as we move forward into the year. We've seen some eye-popping rate increases of 20+% already in the year. It's just gotten started. So that adds another dimension to what we'll talk about here over the next few minutes. But if I had to say that there's 3 reasons for the energy transition, the first and foremost is that there is an increased amount of demand for energy around the world, and there's an increased demand for reliability. You see this as you look for storage, for generators for homes. This got highlighted in the pandemic where everybody started at least doing some work from home. You got to have connectivity and you got to have power. And so more and more, if you look at the trends out there, more and more people are getting home generation for that purpose. And so increasing reliability as climate change impacts our climate, nastier hurricanes, which we've certainly seen here in Houston, and wildfires in California and Colorado and Arizona, and the list goes on and on. And that goes into the second one, which is climate change. And up until last week, that really was a big driver. It obviously is a crisis and a disaster across the globe, and certainly a crisis for humanity. And how we deal with this problem of both supplying the energy that is being demanded by consumers across the globe, particularly as that demand increases, but at the same time, not suffer from the aftermath, pretty significant aftermath of pollution from consuming those hydrocarbons to power our lives. And so that's is a crisis and something that we feel deeply about. We can be a part of the solution on. But at the same time, I think that what you'll hear out of us that maybe is a little different from others is that there has to be a balance. We use natural gas in our generators. We have a very firm view that there's going to have to be a transition here because you can't, literally can't put solar panels on everybody's home by the end of this year or even the end of the next year. So there's got to be something here that transitions us. And that leads into the last problem that has been staring at us in the face and frankly, been thinking about for quite a while, but now everybody has become front of mind and really trying to get their head around it, which is, oil and gas is often used by regimes that, are not friendly to democracy and certainly not friendly to freedom. And you're seeing that play out in real time, unfortunately, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So this is definitely causing the spike in which I think will be a surge, not a spike. I think it's going to continue to move higher in oil, natural gas, coal, et cetera. And so that's exacerbating these other situations and causing more problems on top of problems that we just mentioned in the terms of increased demand for reliability, climate change. And that's going to be with us for a long, long time. And so as you look forward in terms of Texas and how Sunnova was founded in Houston. There's still a lot of chuckles that go around about that, about a solar company being in the oil and gas capital of the world. But I think it's really goes to the point is that Houston is changing, Texas is changing, and why limit ourselves to just being the oil and gas capital of the world? Why don't we go ahead and own all of the energy? And by the way, include all of Texas in that as well. And indeed, we're making big strides to that. The relocation of Tesla's headquarters to Austin was a significant step forward. Tesla, by the way, is a very important partner of ours. We buy more of their batteries for homes than any other company in the world. And so it was a big move to welcome them to Texas. It's a big move to have us grow up in Houston in the backyard of oil and gas country and really embrace, if you will, the energy, culture and landscape. And I will tell you this, that Sunnova wouldn't be Sunnova today and successful without Houston. It's demographic diversity, it's low cost structure, and it's deep talented pool of people that really understand energy. And so these are all assets for us to work with as we look forward to changing the way that Texas thinks about energy and essentially broaden our thoughts, our horizons, as far as what we can do in Texas and what should be included in the Texan energy business. And if you look at a big part of this are the universities. Obviously, I went to the other university, as Brian mentioned, but University of Texas has been on the forefront of the energy transition and renewable energy, and is certainly a very much an important part of making Texas the leader in the energy transition and renewable energy. University of Houston is also a big part and has got a lot of focus on the energy side of things, as well as other universities in Texas. But for the workforce that we need, these universities like University of Texas and right down the road from us is something that is really instrumental into making sure that we can have the talent to continue to grow the business at the kind of rate we're growing at and to change the world of energy and change Texas with it. When you look at overall what our vision of the future is, and I think this is interesting, a lot of people spend most of the time thinking about how to take what we have today, internal combustion engines, for instance, filling up at gas stations along the highway, electric utilities that are centralized that burn natural gas and combined cycle units that are umpteen miles away in the middle of nowhere, or coal, or a nuclear plant, or in some cases wind farms and solar farms and so forth. And how do you take a look at those models and say, it's not just making those green. It's not just taking the coal plant and putting it in a wind farm in its place. It's not just taking a electric vehicle and then putting a charging station on the side of the highway and expecting it all to just be the same. And a lot of people view it that way. I don't think that's the right way to view it at all. I think with these new technologies, specifically solar and batteries, for the first time in the energy business's history, what you have is a distributed fuel source, the sun, and you have a distributed efficient conversion technology, taking that raw BTU, sunlight, and moving it and converting it into electricity, so kilowatt hour, megawatt hour. And before that, you'd really had much more of it. It had to be a centralized fuel source, Niagara Falls and the first major power plant, for instance, or a coal source, a coal mine mouth operation, major natural gas pipeline, and then it was certainly a much more efficient conversion to take a very large plant, convert it into electricity, and then wire it out to all the different homes and businesses over miles and miles. And now you have a different set of technologies, and each of these, as you combine them with software and then a service like ours, is enabling new business models to be formed. And again, as I said earlier, you might want to think of us as a wireless power company, but indeed that's the vision: is how do you have solar, batteries, maybe a generator, but load management, EV charging, other technologies all wired together, if you will, with software, with a single app. You can call it a single pane of glass that you go in and see. And it's backed up by somebody that knows what they're doing, how to fix things, and can get to that house pretty quickly if something goes wrong. If they can't remote diagnose the problem and fix the problem. And that's a totally different business model. It's more of a distributed utility, if you will, versus the centralized utility. The other side of that is increasingly we are the gas station. The home is the gas station, is maybe a bit, more direct way of putting it. And you're not filling up the electric vehicle on the side of the road. So that's a completely different model. And a lot of things that we do on the electric vehicle side of things, maybe we stop and get lunch on a trip, and we charge up during that period of time versus running out to a couple of gas stations on the way there and filling up with a few minutes. So these are things that are completely different models that you really think through. Obviously, incumbents are very threatened by these changes. We deal with the utilities all the time on that front, but those same kind of threats are also opportunities, and particularly for you all, these are tremendous opportunities, both in the sense of going to work for a company like Sunnova, coming out of school, or founding your own company, and coming up with a different way of doing, more efficient way of doing things, and embracing the technology. And that's something that I think Texas is really good about in the energy business. Was the fracking revolution of a few years ago. We look at how could it be done better, and we get after it, and we come up with new and better ways and better business models. And so I'm quite confident we'll see a lot of innovation and change as we move forward in this energy transition. Lastly, I would say that there is a growing amount of interest into having self-reliance of energy, and in the growing amount of problems that climate change brings about, storms, the utilities cutting power in other areas like California based on wildfires, even geopolitical uncertainty gives people more comfort to say, I could power my house without having to be dependent upon a centralized system and so forth. And again, that's a long-term trend, and that's something that we see: energy independence. And I think that's really, when you say energy independence, it's almost something that's very Texan about that, is how do you do energy well, and then at the same time, what's a word that describes Texans more than independent? And so that's something that we focus on quite a bit. We see a big trend in that, and we see a lot more, like I said earlier, innovation that can happen around as we move forward in the energy transition. And lastly, before we get into Q&A, what I would say is that the events, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, there's no question that most of that war machine is powered by minerals, and including oil and gas, especially oil and gas, and we're looking to limit that through sanctions and so forth. It really brings home the importance of how do we have an independent country that can supply its own energy, not just with oil and gas, which has been the old way of thinking about, but also with renewable energy. And how can we make, as has been put by the Europeans, renewable energy be freedom energy? It doesn't mean that we're going to not need natural gas anytime soon, or even oil, and unfortunately probably even coal anytime soon. It means that we move forward in figuring out how do we speed up the adoption of renewable energy like solar and batteries, and how do we make sure that we have enough adequate energy supplies so that we can function as a country and move forward, and not be under the thumb of people like Putin. And that's going to cause, I predict, a very much an interest in accelerating the energy transition. Should it have been climate change alone that would cause that interest? I would argue yes. But I think those two combinations, both climate change and needing to address that, and the geopolitical issues that now have been highlighted about how risky the global energy business really is, particularly with regards to national security, those things are going to be driving forward. And then from now on, and accelerating a movement towards an energy transition and be self-reliance as a country for our energy needs. So lots of opportunity. I predict the next few years, the next 10, 15 years is going to be really a golden age for energy transition, and something that would be, hard pressed to find anywhere else in the economy as far as starting your career, to find anything more exciting, more, probably, economically advantageous for you, but most importantly, we're here to change the world and for the better. And there's a lot of problems out there. These two in particular that we've talked about, changing consumer demands. And so there's a real mission here in life about how to make the world a better place. And I would hope each of you, whether it's with Sunnova or with another company, your own company that you found, really embark upon that journey and help us change the world. So with that, I think turn it back over to Brian, but happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Really insightful messages, I guess, about the energy transition. I'll start off with my first question. I mean, founding a solar company in 2012, at that time period, what sort of insanity was that all about? I mean, if you know anything about the solar industry, there was a big crash sort of around that time. I'm just curious about the inception of Sunnova and what some of your thoughts were to get into it at that time. I mean, it's pretty interesting, and then to see the solar industry thrive and take off the way it has over the last 10 years. Love to hear your insights about that.
Yeah, I think I've been in the power business now, so the energy business for 26 years. And, I always found since I was, a boy that energy business is exciting. I mean, it was a bit of romantic, you get to go off in far-flung areas of the world, and you get to do really neat things. And you see the entrepreneurs, many of which, greatly contributed to the development of University of Texas and Texas A&M, having commercial success and obviously donating a large part of those monies back into the universities to invest in the future of Texas. And so there's something really cool about that. And then you look at, what was going on when I started getting into power trading and so forth after I graduated from A&M. It was clear to me that we were way, way overdue as a species, but as a country, for a big change in energy, and both for stationary and transportation. And as you move forward in time and realize, this is early O's, right? More and more of, my gosh, this climate change thing is really real. There's a real problem here. And so that's another, I think I'm understating it clearly, but tailwind, if you will. But overall, I also realized that the geopolitics of energy were getting worse. And remember, not shortly after I got to Harvard Business School, 9/11 happened. And, we were really dealing with wars in the Middle East and so forth. And you could just see that these issues, China's rise, saw that coming and saw that we're going to consume a lot more. India's rise as well. That's all become true. And so when you look at all these different trends, huge demand increase, pollution causing massive threats to humanity, the geopolitical issues that go around with having certain people have control of those resources that are necessary for life on Earth. These are the kind of things that you go, wow, there's a big opportunity here. So if there's a small quote crash, and there's all kinds of things like everybody's trying to figure out even today about what the different business models I was referencing are going to be successful in solar and so forth. And so it's the Wild West. I mean, we're settling it. At least now you can see the vagaries of maybe a St. Louis, and you definitely got San Francisco and a little bit of what becomes Dallas Fort Worth and so forth, to just kind of give you an idea. But it's still we've got started to see some outline of what that success will look like. And that's also going to be met with some cycles. We certainly have seen them even in the last 3 months, where you've got, a lot of optimism and then suddenly a lot of pessimism, and then the optimism will come back. And that's just part of being an entrepreneur. So you just look through those kind of times that you referenced when you're starting the company and go, I know the fundamentals, I know the long-term trend. This too shall pass, and let's just push on through it. And the last part I would add, into that is Texas. I mean, let's be honest. A lot of people chuckle even more and saying, "Well, what were you doing putting a solar company in Houston? Like, what happened? Were you unemployed permanently? I mean, what were you thinking? You didn't have a choice?" And it really was more about that. Like I said earlier, Houston in Texas is a great place to be. It's a great low cost area to grow a business, and the people are wonderful. The people are very diverse as well, which has been a huge boom for us in our business, particularly in Spanish speaking areas like Puerto Rico and others areas. And so there's a lot of positive aspects. There's much more positives about it. It just seems right to me, but for other people looking in outside and like, I don't get it. But as you can see, and I'm much more bullish about Texas' future in the energy transition. These things that are core to us, our assets, are really going to make us very, very successful here in owning not just the existing energy industry, but the new energy industry as well.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, so I direct a solar research center, and Sonova is part of that, and that's that sort of thing. And we've been doing that for the last 12 years or so. So I've seen the industry grow, and it's really remarkable. You mentioned some of the new technologies. I mean, solar plus storage. If you combine electric vehicles, I mean, I really think in the last year or two has the beginning of a technological revolution. I mean, in terms of what's available. I was trying to remember if this was, I think 2020 was one of the first announcements of grid utility scale storage plus solar. Um, at really low cost came online. I think when we saw that, we were like, wow, that just blowing everything open. So you've got um, these connections between transportation, how we live, how we get our power. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, how do you've been in, since 2012, Sonova was started. I mean, how have you seen technology progress, and do you think anything's different now at this particular time period than say 10 years ago?
Yeah, it's been a general trend that you get about 10 watts of energy density pickup on solar modules every 9 months, maybe 12 months. Last year, it was 50 watts. So it was a step function change. There are other technologies that are out there that are starting to become more real in the solar module area, and we'll see what happens. But and the general trend has been up, and it's accelerating to your point, Brian. I think the most exciting area is on the storage side of things, and that's really coming into its own very, very fast. I remember as little as 2.5 years ago having a big debate with others that looked at storage and said it's never going to happen. In fact, I think there's some award-winning chemists and so forth around, say, Texas that said it was never going to happen. And then the next year, I was buying, massive sums of batteries, from Tesla and others, but mostly Tesla. And I was like, well, that didn't last long in terms of that naysaying. So you're seeing a significant scale up, to say the least, and there's different chemistries, NMC, LiFo on the lithium ion, but you're also starting to hear more and more and see more companies on the solid state lithium. And I do think that eventually happens here. The question is when. The interesting thing about it is, as you go back, is as they say, necessity is the mother of invention, right? We now have, if we couldn't get everybody on the same page and really energize them, pardon the pun, to address climate change and see as the emergency that it is, again, going back into it, Putin's invasion of Ukraine really is going to highlight this. And so when you have hydrocarbon prices at historic levels, where I think of where we're going, you're going to incent a lot of people, and you're sending a signal across that everybody gets in the country that, hey, we've got a real emergency. We need to be all in on R&D. We need to be all in and getting the technologies out the door as fast as possible. And the money is more money than you need, frankly, is there to be able to do that. So I think this is a culmination of events and fundamentals, not just a passage of some bill by some president of whatever party, and subsidy, whatever you want to call it, but also just the fundamentals of the market and these fundamental trends that we're talking about. They're going to accelerate the technology over the next from here to the next few years. We're quite bullish on the technology change.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the solid state batteries, we had a panel yesterday about the energy innovation ecosystem in Austin, and with 4 CEOs of startups, and one of the CEOs, T. Egan from EnergyX, they're trying to extract lithium, from produced water and things like that, but also looking at solid state electrolytes. So that's definitely a really interesting area. Got a question in the chat. So I guess this relates to policy. The question is, what's the lasting effect of the Trump photovoltaic tariffs? Did they actually increase U.S. photovoltaic manufacturing? Are they still in place?
Yeah. So I'm much more, as you introduced me, is much more focused on freedom all the way across, freedom to choose your provider. I don't like being told that you can have this monopoly utility and that's all you get. I think people ought to have choice, and hopefully they choose Sunnova, but that's my job to earn that business, right? But it should be a fundamental right that you have the ability to choose, who you want to have as a service provider. And you should have a fundamental right to have freedom and open access to markets. And I'm not going to waver from that. And I've found it to be, both parties, Democrats and Republicans, have wandered off in the desert on these kind of things. And what I also say is tariffs have never worked in any civilization or any structure of government for 2,000 years. So why do we keep trying them? I mean, it's the definition of insanity. And I made that point to the Trump administration. But the first tariffs were actually put under the Obama administration. And this is something that, it's really interesting. Candidly, I made more money personally under Trump. And then a lot of my friends in oil and gas have made a ton more money in 1 year under Biden than they did in 4 years under Trump. And I guarantee you, we didn't vote for the same person in the last election. And so there's a lot of interesting counterintuitive things that go on here, and trade policy is one of them. So yeah, President Obama put the first tariff in place. The behind the scenes was that was a response by the break-in of a certain facility, solar module facility in the West Coast, by the Chinese government stealing plans. And so it was a retaliation for that. And that's why you didn't see a whole lot of retaliation. The Chinese, they're kind of like, okay, we deserved it. Let's move on. Trump, on the other hand, put something in place that was, from their view, not warranted. And I agree with them. And it certainly wasn't effective. And that was another set of tariffs that were put in place. And then President Biden has continued some of those various tariffs. In fact, for the first time in the country's history, a Section 201 tariff was extended a few days ago. And look, I think the facts speak for themselves. Tariffs do not work, as I mentioned, but what does work is incentives. And we're going to need to put incentives to buy the semiconductor business back from the Taiwanese. And we did so before with the Japanese, and actually Austin was instrumental in that. We need to do that on the solar module side and the battery side of things. And so I think a manufacturing subsidy of some sort to really get things kick-started here in this country is something that's necessary. I'm not a big subsidy fan at all, but we're dealing with governments that are basically acting in ways that are not capitalistic. And I do see, talking to some of the political leaders of the state on both the D and the R side, obviously mostly on the R, and state of Texas, that there is a view on that. Get out of the way, hate subsidies, hate them. However, if that's the way the opponents want to play, and we have to play that game too. So that's a better way of going about doing this. And tariffs are something that continually, hang over our head all the time. And it could be a problem. I mean, right now you're seeing utility scale solar and storage drop from the levels of the last year under the Trump administration tremendously. And a big part of this is because of tariffs on the solar panel side of things. So we've been able to navigate that. There's some economic reasons why we can afford to pay more for the panels and so forth. than the utility scale can, but it's been a real problem, continues to be a real issue. And the long-term solution is let's pass some subsidies, get the manufacturers, start building a base here in this country, create the jobs here, and then remove the tariffs and let the competitive landscape work.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Do you happen to know if there's any funding going to be set aside in the infrastructure bill that can help bring some of that solar manufacturing, back to the U.S. or help support it?
There was not in the infrastructure bill. There was in the Build Back Better, which is now, I think, pretty well known to be dead. And there's some of this in the what they call the Competes bill, which was put together to essentially compete with China. It's not the country's not named there, but we all know who we're competing against in manufacturing, and it was really centered around the semiconductor industry. But we're the close cousin of the semiconductor business, with a direct overlap in many cases on the solar module side. So that's something that's in Congress right now. There's a good likelihood that I personally think and have thought for the last 3 weeks that we'll actually get an energy bill. And yes, it's because of the invasion in Ukraine. And you're starting to see some of that over the last 48, 72 hours, mention of that on both sides of the aisle. So I think hopefully we'll get something in that bill that would incent manufacturing of solar modules, batteries, et cetera, to come here in the United States. Of course, we want it here in Texas as much as we can get. We want it here in Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if there's any role you think UT Austin can play in that, please send me a couple emails. Happy to help. Another question from the chat. So, in terms of EV charging, so you mentioned, it's a fascinating way to look at solar. It's a distributed energy resource. You're not driving to the gas pump. You're basically your house is the filling station for the most part, and that opens up a lot of opportunities, including like using your battery to connect to the grid, for example. So, when do you think technologies like vehicle to grid, vehicle to home start to become a mainstream reality, and maybe what role do you suggest the auto manufacturers can play in that?
Well, it's interesting. As recently as I would say a couple of years ago, maybe 18 months ago, folks like Elon really didn't believe in vehicle to to building charging, and so bidirectional essentially is the way the phrase is. And now that's totally changed. Ford it even had commercials during the Super Bowl, right, about take the F-150 Lightning and charge your home and so forth. So it's definitely part of what we're working on, is to think about this simple. Your home needs to go off grid. Power's not there. It's more economical to do it, whatever it is, for that period of time. You're charging your electric vehicle. What happens? Do you have enough energy there to do both at the same time? Is that vehicle actually discharging, so it enables you to because something else happened to the batteries that were attached directly to your house? I mean, these are the current challenges that we're grappling with, but they're also clearly opportunities. And on this particular issue, some of the things that we're working on, specifically with ChargePoint, and that relationship there. Also, you're looking at some innovations coming out of Tesla and some of the other ESS, or the energy storage systems. These are the batteries, effectively, the Powerwall, et cetera, from Tesla, Generac, SolarEdge, and others out there. So it's definitely happening. And what's interesting is consumer demand. It's so exciting about powering your house with your car is pushing us all to do something here that we wouldn't have thought about otherwise doing. Saying, we got so much more to do over here and get this to work, and solar and just storage, and consumers like, no, but I want this. And again, the environment here with energy pricing and so forth is going to accelerate this as well. So it's something we're working on. It's not quite there yet to really even do in a test case, but I predict it's going to, something's going to come that's going to make this something that we roll out to our customers within the next 24 months.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, a question I get a lot from the public, which I think I understand, but maybe you can weigh in on this. You mentioned how you interact with the utilities and that sort of thing. A lot of homeowners were wondering why they have solar panels on their roof, but during Uri, when the power went out, the solar panels wouldn't generate any power. Um, can you explain what that's all about?
Yeah, so years and years ago, the utilities, under the guise of not wanting to have a lineman work on a line that was down and have it, backflow, if you will, and shock the lineman or kill them, said that you cannot have inverters. You basically have to be inline inverters that when the grid goes down, they go down too. Now, it is also true that for over 20 years, we've had the technology to deal with that issue and be able to have, fully functioning homes that form their own grid forming, if you will, and not have a backflow problem. So why were those rules and to this day still in place? Anti-competitive behavior by the utilities. They don't like when people don't buy the amount of power that they would like us to buy. And that has created the situation where we had to deal a lot with in Puerto Rico and Maria, which is, and I get it. Hey, the panels are on my roof. Why didn't the power just come straight down here? And that's the reason why. Now, there's been some innovation in that you've taken what was the an off-grid inverter, if you will, and made it to where you can produce power and just have the sun and not have a battery and have that power flow into your house. And so basically working around some of the I wouldn't say working around, but basically having technology that addresses the issues of the utility regulation, but at the same time enables you to basically have power when the grid goes down, which is solar panels. The problem is that technology, to your question earlier, has moved on. And now batteries are getting cheaper and cheaper, much more available. And so it's like, well, why would I want to do that? Because the problem you're going to have is if a cloud moves across the sun, boom, your house goes down, right? There's no storage capability of it. So again, these are still intermittent resource here, and so most people, like 99.9% of the people, are just going to go like, just give me a battery, and then we'll figure out how much of the house I want to back up. I personally have been the long-term believer in whole home backup versus doing partial circuits and so forth. So it's much due to technological change in the battery side of things and the ramping up, so dropping of the cost of the batteries is to the point where it's just like, and we do this a lot and increasingly so, is go back to those solar only customers and say, hey, why don't we sign you up for a battery or two?
Awesome. Well, that's going to do it. John, thanks so much for giving that keynote and answering all those questions. And I really enjoyed hearing all your perspectives all the way from technology, business creation, policy. So really appreciate it. Thanks again, John.
Thanks
All
for
right, so
having
we're
me.
gonna
And by the way, we're hiring. We're hiring lots of folks. So for those of you who want to join the revolution, if you will, please come see us. But thank you for having me, Brian. I really enjoyed it.
yeah. Thanks again. All right, so we're gonna move on to our next panel, which is on hydrogen storage and power sector.